All right, so let's keep moving northward with our journey here through Canada and the Boreal Forest of Canada. We get to the northern edge and we're getting into what they call the taiga. So this is where you start getting kind of this transition from the boreal forests, which at this point is primarily going to be conifers, very few deciduous trees on the northern edge of the boreal. So mostly conifers, and then moving into the tundra. But again, when we look at the temperature distribution and the moisture distribution of boreal, it gets cold. So you look at the temperature on the left side of that graph, it's going to get cold in that boreal forest, 30 below on the Celsius scale. I mean, that's pretty darn cold. So trees that do best in those environments are conifers. They don't freeze as easily because of the resin in them. The needles and the needles and the branches shed snow. They resist drying out when it gets that cold. Deciduous trees don't do well when it's that cold. Again, that's why we see this transition as you move through the boreal forest. As you're going north, you're losing, or you're going to have fewer and fewer deciduous trees, more and more of the conifers, until again you get to that edge, the taiga, pretty much dominated by conifers. As you move through the taiga and you kind of push through that, you then get into the tundra. Now, the tundra is pretty much cold year round. It's going to be a cold biome year round. There is a growing season, but it's pretty brief. And I'll show you that map, that graph in a minute here. But it's cold. Now, it's not always latitude that dictates tundra. You can go up a mountain. So remember, elevation, moving up in elevation can give you the same type of biomes as you would experience if you moved from the equator north with your latitude. So high latitudes or high elevations, like mountaintops, both can have tundra types of environments. Again, cold year round. The growing season, you might have 2 to 3 months. So we'll put this in here. Short growing season, 2 to 3 months. And a big feature is this stuff called permafrost. Permafrost is frozen ground. It never completely thaws out. It thaws a little bit, but underneath, if you go down a foot into the tundra, it's probably still frozen. The top layer may thaw out during the growing season, builds up pools of moisture, things like that, but then it gets cold again in a couple weeks and it all freezes back up again. Tundra can experience frost any month of the year. It can have frost. Obviously, certain months it's going to have snow and freezing temperatures. Even during their summer growing season, you can have frost and cold nights in the tundra. So it creates challenges for the plant life. You're not going to have a lot of big, tall vegetation. You're not going to get these big trees because A, they can't grow down through the frozen ground, and B, they freeze up too often. So they can't get big and large and woody types of vegetation there. So the tundra vegetation is mostly low-lying, we call them sedges, mosses, lichens, things like that don't need to get big to do their job. So don't expect a lot of big trees and forest type of vegetation in the tundra, and mostly low-lying flat stuff. All right, so what we've done is we've looked from the tropical zone up to the temperate zone and even pushed into this tundra type of zone for terrestrial biomes. What I want to do now is introduce you guys to the aquatic biomes. So just like on land, you have different biomes: deserts, tropical rainforest, temperate rainforest, conifers or boreal forest, tundra. The aquatic world has the same parallels. There are different ecosystems or different biomes within the aquatic world. So what we're going to start with are the marine ecosystems and look at those and talk about those. And then we'll move our way from the ocean into the transition area we call an estuary, and then we'll move up into freshwater. So marine ecosystems are as diverse as terrestrial ecosystems. And just like terrestrial ecosystems, marine ecosystems have a bunch of factors that influence the marine biomes. So first factor to mention is depth. How deep is the water? That's going to make a big difference because the depth influences how far light goes down. Does light reach the bottom of that biome? If it reaches the bottom, then that allows producers to grow on the bottom and attach to the substrate. Coral reefs tend to be in shallow tropical waters. So depth and light penetration go hand in hand. If you have a very deep, deep part of the ocean, you don't have light reaching down to the floor of the ocean. You're not going to have anything living, any photosynthesizers, I should say, growing on the floor of the ocean. They'll be floating in the water. Those are our algae, but that changes the producer base of that biome. Temperature. What kind of temperature does that biome experience? Depth influences temperature. Light penetration influences temperature. Ocean currents influence temperature. All these things come together to influence the temperature of the biome. And to make sure we mention it, let's put it in here. Ocean currents. How does the ocean current move through that biome? Is it bringing in nutrients? Is it carrying warm water, cold water? What's going on with that ocean current? What is the salinity of that biome? If you're close to the coast, your salt levels are going to vary because you have fresh water coming in. If you're further out into the ocean, your salt levels vary because you have no fresh water or little fresh water influencing you. So again, salt concentration changes what species can survive there. And then the last one to mention here is coastal runoff. If you're in close proximity with the coast, you have different variables that will influence you. So looking at that picture there, that brown cloud, well, that's coastal runoff coming out of that community. Erosion, sediment, pollutants, trash, etc. All those things wash from terrestrial biomes into the aquatic biomes and can significantly influence the aquatic biomes. All right, so all these factors play a role in marine ecosystems, and a lot of them will overlap and play a role in freshwater ecosystems. So we explore biological productivity in marine ecosystems by looking at the chlorophyll levels. How much chlorophyll is there? Phytoplankton is the primary producer in the marine ecosystem. There are very, very few plants that actually live in the marine ecosystem. Plants are terrestrial things. They're not really aquatic things, especially in a saltwater environment. There's a handful of plants, turtle grass, eelgrass, mangroves, but there's not a lot of plants that can survive that salt. Algae, phytoplankton can. Those single-celled, sometimes multicellular organisms can survive in this type of salty environment. But by and large, you're dealing with plankton for your producer base in the marine ecosystem. So the image here shows us primary productivity, biological productivity based on chlorophyll levels, not just in the ocean, but on the land. And these areas, let me get our pen here. These areas on land, we go, okay, this biome, that's a desert because it doesn't have a lot of green. It's brown because there's no plant life. But we could do the same thing in the ocean. Look at this big blue region here. There's very little life there. It's middle of the ocean, too deep for plants or algae to grow from the bottom of the ocean. There's not a lot of nutrients. This could be considered equivalent in productivity to the desert. Big parts of the ocean are considered biological deserts because there's just very, very little productivity. Now, if you notice in the ocean, the areas that have the most green or greenish types of colors, let me get that, tend to be close to the coast. So up in here, you look at these regions, you come over here and go, okay, these coastal regions, because the water tends to be shallower, the ocean currents influence the nutrients and runoff from land. All those factors come together to influence and determine some of the productivity of the ocean. All right. So again, marine ecosystems are as diverse as terrestrial ecosystems here. All right. So let's take a look at how this works in the marine ecosystem with vertical stratification. That's going up and down. Vertical means going up and down here. Shallow regions tend to be warmer because there's more light penetration. Deeper regions tend to be colder and darker because there's less light penetration. Light can only go so far down through water before you start losing wavelengths. Sunlight cannot penetrate 300, 800, 1,000, 2,000, etc. meters down through water with all of the spectrum of wavelengths. It loses them as it goes down. You get too far down, you lose red. You can't see red anymore, and you lose colors. So that influences productivity when you talk about going up and down in the level of the water. And obviously it just depends on how deep it is. If you have a shallow bay where it's only 80 feet deep, light's going to go all the way to the bottom. But you get into the ocean where it's a mile and a half deep, 2 miles deep, there's no way light's making it down there. It's not going to penetrate far enough to actually influence the producer base at the bottom of that. Okay, so when we look at the ocean regions, there's a couple terms here, 3 terms I want you guys to be comfortable with. Benthic means the bottom of the ocean. That's the ocean floor. Okay, here's the lowest layer that we're looking at. Now, it doesn't mean it's deep. It could be 40 feet down, or it could be 3 miles down. But benthic is the bottom substrate that we're talking about. Are you standing on sand? Are you standing on coral? What's on the bottom? That's your benthic zone. The littoral zone is the region near the shore, like close to the shoreline. Usually that's an area of high light penetration, shallow water, warmer temperatures when we talk about littoral. And then the pelagic is the water column above the benthic zone. Let me move this over here, sorry. All right, so it's the water column that is above the benthic zone. So the pelagic would be everything up in here, this area up in here, going from the benthic all the way up to the top there. That tends to be where most of your producer productivity is in the marine ecosystem. Is floating around in the pelagic zone. Again, just get comfortable with those terms. We're going to see them again. Very similar terminology when we get into freshwater ecosystems as well. So here's a better picture, give you an idea of what's going on. So here's your benthic, would be basically the bottom here. And you can break this down even further. You break it down even further into these smaller subdivisions. Go for the big picture. That's really what I want you guys to look at with this, and those correlations between productivity, producer productivity, and the different general zones in the marine ecosystem. So, all right, now this is a fun part of the marine world. Let's break this down into smaller biomes. There's some really, really fascinating biomes within the marine ecosystem, and each of them is unique, just like the terrestrial biomes. Unique with the diversity there, what type of producer base supports it, and then all the animal life that you're going to see there. So we'll get into that in the next part of the lecture.